The line between sanity and madness is thinner than we think. It's not a solid wall, but a fragile veil, easily torn by trauma, chemistry, or the simple, relentless pressure of existence. What happens when that veil tears? What emerges from the other side? We often look at crime through the lens of motive, greed, revenge, passion. But some cases defy this logic. They lead us into the labyrinth of a fractured mind, where reality itself is distorted and the signposts of reason have long since vanished. These are not stories of simple evil, but of profound, unsettling delusion. They force us to confront a terrifying question. How much control do we truly have over our own minds? In the quiet suburbs, where life follows a predictable rhythm, a man named Richard Chase began a journey into darkness. Neighbors saw him as odd, reclusive. Few knew the extent of the storm brewing within. He believed his blood was turning to powder, that his heart was shrinking. To survive, he developed a gruesome obsession, convinced he needed the blood of others to replenish his own. This wasn't a choice fueled by malice in the way we typically understand it. It was a desperate act driven by a psychotic delusion, a battle against an enemy that existed only in his mind. The crimes that followed were not random acts of violence. They were rituals, desperate attempts to cure an imaginary illness. His case forces us to look beyond the act itself and into the shattered psyche of the perpetrator. How does a mind become so convinced of an alternate reality that it justifies the unthinkable? The story of the Papin sisters is another descent into a shared madness. Christine and Leah worked as live-in maids for a wealthy family in Le Mans, France. They were inseparable, living in a small attic room, their world confined to the four walls of their employer's home and each other. For years they were described as quiet, diligent, almost invisible. But beneath the surface, a silent pressure was building. Resentment, isolation, and a complex, intense bond between them created a psychological pressure cooker. One evening, a minor incident, a malfunctioning iron, became the spark. What followed was an explosion of violence that shocked the nation. But was it a simple act of rage against their employers? Or was it the culmination of a shared psychosis, a folie à deux, where two minds feed each other's delusions until they erupt? The sisters had created their own private world, with its own rules and its own logic. When that world was threatened, the consequences were devastating. Their story isn't just about a crime, it's about the terrifying power of psychological fusion, where one person's madness becomes another's reality. Consider the case of Herbert Mullen. In the early 1970s, California was gripped by fear. Mullen, a bright young man voted most likely to succeed in high school, began to hear voices. These voices told him that an impending, catastrophic earthquake could only be prevented through human sacrifice. In his mind, he wasn't a murderer. He was a hero, a savior, preventing a natural disaster that would kill millions. He meticulously chose his victims, believing he was following instructions from a higher power to save the world. Each life he took was, in his distorted view, a necessary offering to maintain the balance of the universe. He even rationalized his actions to police after his capture, explaining the cosmic significance of his deeds. Mullen's case illustrates a complete breakdown of reality testing. He was living in a world governed by a terrifying, delusional narrative. His actions, while horrific, were internally consistent with his psychotic beliefs. He was the protagonist in a story no one else could see, fighting a battle no one else knew existed. This raises a disturbing question. If the mind can construct such a convincing, all-encompassing delusion, what protects any of us from falling into our own? These cases are not meant to excuse the horrific acts committed. The pain and loss of the victims are undeniable and absolute. But to prevent future tragedies, we must dare to look into the abyss of the disturbed mind. We must try to understand the pathways that lead to such a profound break from reality. Psychology calls it psychosis, a condition where the mind loses contact with the external world. Delusions and hallucinations become the new reality, more potent and more persuasive than anything our senses tell us. For the person experiencing it, these beliefs aren't just ideas, they are fundamental truths. The voice they hear is as real as the chair they sit on. The conspiracy they uncover is as certain as the rising of the sun. Arguing against it is like arguing against the laws of physics. Forensic psychology attempts to map these broken landscapes. It looks for the fault lines, the genetic predispositions, the early childhood traumas, the chemical imbalances that can lead to a mind's collapse. But it's not an exact science. The human mind is not a machine with predictable breaking points. It is an infinitely complex ecosystem. Sometimes the trigger is obvious, a traumatic event, a history of abuse. Other times it's insidious, a slow creeping change that goes unnoticed until it's too late. The person changes, withdraws, and begins speaking a language of paranoia and fear that loved ones can no longer understand. They are lost in their own internal world, a place that is both terrifying and, to them, utterly logical. We are left with the silence of the aftermath, empty rooms that hold the echoes of a life undone, police tape fluttering in the wind on a quiet street, the faces of family members etched with a grief and confusion that will never fully fade. These stories leave us with a profound sense of unease because they challenge our most basic assumptions about control and identity. They remind us that the person we are, our thoughts, our beliefs, our perception of the world, is built on a delicate neurological foundation. And sometimes, for reasons we may never fully comprehend, that foundation crumbles. The world we see is not the only world there is. For some, another reality, darker and more demanding, takes over. And exploring that darkness is not about finding monsters, but about understanding the terrifying fragility of the human mind itself. If you or someone you know is struggling with their mental health, please know that help is available and you are not alone. Reaching out is a sign of strength. You can contact a mental health professional or a crisis hotline in your area. Your well-being matters. Thanks for watching.